One of the most memorable experiences that I have, positive, memorable experiences, is actually our first trip as a family when I was a kid going to Florida. We were going to go to Disney World and we were going to go to SeaWorld, and we ended up going to a place, it was an alligator zoo. I'm trying to remember what it was called. It was not, I don't think it was probably anything spectacular from what I remember. As far as, being super fancy. But they had alligators and it was the Gatorland Zoo. That's what it was. I remember, see now, the Gatorland Zoo down in Florida. And so we went to that. We went to SeaWorld. We went to Busch Gardens. We went all over the place. But one of the things that makes the trip so memorable is just the first day of the trip. And we get on the first time we've ever flown on an airplane, and so that's memorable. And you get to Florida and you're really excited because we went in the winter, and so we left Denver and it was snowing, and we got to Florida, and of course it's sunny and in the 70s, which to us is really warm. And so we get in the car. The rental car takes a little longer than anybody was expecting, but we get in this rental minivan because we're a family of 5. We need a little bit of space, and we get in the car. We head over to the hotel that we have a reservation for, and it's a little later in the day than what we were hoping to get there. But with all of the extended time getting the rental car and getting all the luggage and getting everything loaded, it just took a little longer than was expected. What we didn't know is that with this hotel, at that particular point in time, if we didn't check in by a certain time, then they could give our room away. So we get to the hotel, and we're about 5 minutes past that point. And sure enough, there's no room for us. They do not have our room for a reservation, which totally brings me back to a Seinfeld episode where he goes to get a rental car, having reserved one, and they don't have one. And it's just one of those moments where it's like everything is kind of going nuts. And my dad is one that he is a rather emotional man from time to time. And so he's getting upset, and this is a positive experience, believe it or not. We're going to get there. And so my dad is getting upset. He's getting angry. He's really kind of, he's like, what are we supposed to do? I've got my family here. We have this reservation. You gave our room away. And so they start working around, and they call some of the hotels that are near there, and they find a place for us to go. So we get in the car again. We drive down the road a little ways, and we go out to this other hotel, which ends up being actually, I think, even a little nicer than the one that we were supposed to stay at in the first place. And we get out, we get into the hotel room, get checked in, we go grab something to eat, and we come back, and we immediately, as kids, get in the pool. It's like the highlight of our day is we're going to go swimming. And we get in the pool, and there's nobody else in the pool. It's just us. Okay, it's me and my dad and my 2 sisters. That's it in the hotel pool. It's outside. We're in the pool, swimming around, and these people walk by the door to get out of the hotel and into the pool. They walk by, and they come back after walking by, noticing that we are in the pool. And it's probably 71, 72 degrees outside, okay? And they are wearing jeans, long sleeve shirts, and the guy is wearing a cowboy hat. And he comes up to the pool and he says, "Hey," and my dad says, "Oh, hey, how are you?" And my dad's super friendly. He knows somebody everywhere he goes. He doesn't know this guy yet, but he just loves to talk to people. This guy says, "Hey, where are y'all from?" And my dad says, "Oh, we're from Denver." He goes, "Oh, okay. That explains it." And then he walks away. So for everybody else, it was apparently too cold to go swimming. But for us, it was such a great day. How could you resist? So we actually ended up going swimming every night after we did our stuff, and it was probably one of the highlights of our entire trip as kids at that point. We went to Disney World. It was great. But when we got back from Disney World, we went swimming. And then we went to SeaWorld, and it was great. But when we got back from SeaWorld, we went swimming. And it was great to go swimming every night after we got back. And it was one of the most positive experiences we probably had as kids. So I really enjoyed that. Memories are important, especially with certain games. I don't know how many of you are probably familiar with this. I'm assuming probably most of us, if not all of us, are familiar with the game memory. Anybody familiar with the game memory? It can be called maybe a couple different things, but memory is this game where you have a bunch of cards with pictures on them. All right, you can play with just a deck of cards as well. All right, that's how we started out as kids until my sisters got like princess-themed memory one birthday or something. And so, but you lay out all the cards, and each card has a match, okay? And so you might have frogs and dogs and trees and apples and all these kinds of things, each card having a match. Okay, a match game is another name for it. All kinds of different names really for this game, a couple different names. But the idea is you lay them all out randomly after you've mixed them all up, turn them all over so you can't see any of the pictures, and then you take turns flipping over 2 cards. And if they match, then you get to keep them. And if they don't, you have to turn them back over, and it's the next person's turn. And as you go, the idea is that you remember where those cards were, so that when you turn over the matching card, you can go back and match it up, pair it up, and keep that pair, because whoever has the most matches or whoever has the highest number of pairs wins the game. And so your memory is super important to this particular game, because if you don't remember where any of the cards are, you're going to lose. You're just not going to be any good at it. I remember my sister was super great. My sister Melissa, my youngest sister, was great at this game. She just always seemed to remember where all the cards were. She would see them one time, and she'd be able to turn them over and just match them up. And it was ridiculous. So when she would get lucky and just happen to turn over 2 randomly that matched, you were in trouble, because you're like, she's going to get a ton of matches because we've already covered pretty much all the cards that we already knew where they were, and now she's matching things that we just randomly are matching together so that she's getting matches. And so she was just great at this game. Other games that require memory, like Trivial Pursuit. Maybe you're great with random facts. When the first pop-up toaster was invented and patented, or, all these different, 1857, by the way. But, that's the kind of stuff that sometimes you're really good at. Maybe you're really great at those kinds of random facts. Trivia is one of my things. It's something I really enjoy, something I tend to be good at because I remember things that make no difference and aren't important. And so that's the kind of stuff that you have to have a good memory for. And yet, the reality is that in games like Memory or Trivial Pursuit, any other kind of game that's like that, they all are testing our memory, and they're really challenging to us in a lot of ways sometimes. In fact, sometimes to the point where people just refuse to play those kinds of games because we don't enjoy them, because we're not good at them. Maybe we don't have a good memory, or our memory isn't as good as it used to be maybe. And so some of us are great with these kinds of games, others are not, and we would rather not play them. However, in life, there are times where really when a good memory is vital. It's really important to us, and sometimes, as we look at life, as we go through our days, there really seem to be many times or many areas in life where it's important for us. And it's important that when we just remember things. Our life can be improved in a lot of ways sometimes when we don't forget to remember. I know that sounds kind of silly, but think about that really. Not forgetting to remember. Being intentional about calling certain things to mind, about remembering things, can really help us in life. And so today, with that kind of an idea in mind, memory and remembering things, not forgetting to remember, I want to take a look at Joshua chapter 1, starting in verse 10. We looked at the first 9 verses last week. We're actually going to look at the last 9 verses of the first chapter of Joshua this morning. And I want to see what we can apply to our lives just with that kind of idea, that kind of theme or concept of remembering today as we look at these verses. So Joshua chapter 1, verse 10, your Bibles or Bible apps, It reads like this. Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in to take possession of the land that the Lord or Yahweh your God is giving to you to possess. So he tells everybody, hey, get ready. 3 days, we're crossing the Jordan. We're going to start taking possession of the land. He's bringing to them remembrance, reminding them of what's actually supposed to take place and what God has told them is going to happen. Verse 12, and the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, so he pulls these guys aside, these 2.5 tribes. Why does he pull them aside? Because they've already received their inheritance on that side of the Jordan. They asked specifically to have their inheritance there because it was good land for herding animals, and they were big ranchers, shepherds. They had a lot of herd animals, a lot of livestock, and they said, hey, this is the best place. This is great. Can we just have our inheritance here? And Moses said, yes, you can. That's fine. But when it comes time to cross the Jordan and take over the rest of the land over there, you have to send your fighting men with the rest of the tribes. You can't let them go without you. You have to go help them. And so Joshua is pulling these guys aside to remind them of that particular promise that they would go and do, that they would go and help conquer the land on the other side of the Jordan. So he turns to these guys and he says, verse 13, remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, or Yahweh, commanded you, saying, Yahweh your God is providing you a place of rest and will give you this land. Your wives, your little ones, your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan, but all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers and shall help them. So they have to be the first ones to cross the Jordan. They have to be the ones in the lead as they conquer the land on the other side of the Jordan. Verse 15, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers as he has to you. And they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. So it's not a definite period of time. It's not you have to go for 30 days and then you can come back. No, you have to go until they're done. You can't come back home until they're finished conquering their inheritance. Then you shall return to the land of your possession and shall possess it. The land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise. So Joshua gives them a reminder. He says, you need to remember this promise you guys made and make sure you fulfill it. It's vital. You have to do this. So he reminds them of the whole promise and what they said they were going to do. And verse 16 begins their response to Joshua. Verse 16 says, and they answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Now, if you remember back to last week, if you were here, you'll know that we actually read a part of Scripture where God promises to be with Joshua as he was with Moses. So these guys are basically now reminding Joshua of what God has just spoken to him. He said, may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Verse 18, whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your words, whatever you command him, shall be put to death. So this is pretty serious. All right, they're saying if any of us don't do what you tell us to do, they're done. We're going to take them out. It's over for them. That's how seriously we're going to listen to you and obey what you tell us to do. So if any of us don't, we're going to take them out. Only be strong and courageous. Now that phrase should sound familiar too from our study last week because it's said multiple times through our passage. As God tells Joshua to be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Haven't I told you? Be strong and courageous. And now, here at the end of the chapter, the leaders of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh tell him, hey, be strong and courageous, Joshua. Be strong and courageous. So that's our passage for today. And there are a number of things that the people in this passage were instructed to remember. There are a number of reminders that are put out there for us as we look at this passage. And I think that you and I would actually do well to pay attention to those reminders for our own lives. And as I looked at that passage and I read through it, there were 4 things that really jumped out at me that I think if we will focus and remember, if we will keep those things in mind for ourselves going forward, that they will help our walk with Jesus. The first one is this. Remember what God has already done. Remember what God has already done. Verse 13, Joshua says, remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you a place of rest and will give you this land. So Joshua gives them a reminder right up front, saying, hey, remember, God's already given you your own land. He's already given you a place of rest. He's given you cities. He's given you places to build your corrals for your herds. He's given you a place to build a home for your family. He's given you rest. Don't forget that. Remember what God has already done for you. And it's important that you and I do the same. Because what God has already done for us should motivate us to move forward into the future. It should motivate us. It should give us direction. It should give us energy. And it should drive us to continue to follow him and do what he calls us to do. It's really important that we do that. It's easy if we forget what God has done in the past to grow stagnant and still and be honestly afraid to move forward. Because what we see in front of us can be intimidating. It can be scary. And yet if we remember what God has already done in the past, it makes it easier to take the next step forward. It should motivate us. And what God has already done should also strengthen us. It should encourage us. It should give us that necessary oomph and courage to move forward. It shouldn't just motivate us that, yes, this is what we need to do and give us direction and kind of drive us forward. It should give us the strength to actually take the step. So it's really important that we remember what God has already done. And that's where Joshua begins as he speaks to the people of Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So he reminds them what God has already done. And then we need to remember what God has instructed us to do. Remember the instructions that God has provided. Don't forget what God has called you to do. Don't forget what God is asking of you as you move forward. So we continue through the passage in verses 14 and 15. Joshua says, your wives, your little ones, your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. Your wives and all your livestock, your kids, everybody's going to stay behind except for you guys. They're going to stay right here at home. But all the men of valor, all the fighting men, all the men that are of military age, which is between the ages of 20 and 50. Okay, 20 and 50 for them at that point. All of the men of valor shall pass over armed before your brothers and shall help them. So all the men of valor, all of your fighting men are going to pass over the Jordan in front of your brothers. They're going to lead the way across the Jordan so that they can conquer their territory. And you're going to leave, verse 15, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers as he has to you, and they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. So he tells them of what they've already been told they should do, God's instructions. He reminds them of what they are, reminds them of their calling, reminds them of their next step as they follow what God is telling them to do. We need to do the same. We need to remember what God has instructed us to do. It's important for us. These men have to fulfill what God has instructed them to do. They have to fulfill their promise. They have to fulfill their calling. They have to do what God has asked. And fulfilling our calling, just like they did, will possibly benefit others more than ourselves. How does it benefit them to cross the Jordan and help their brothers take possession of the land while they leave their families behind? How does it benefit them personally? It really doesn't. Other than the fact that maybe they're getting these guys out of their own land so that they have more control over all of the land that's on that side of the Jordan. Maybe that way they benefit, but otherwise there really isn't much benefit at all, is there? It's really for the benefit of the other 10.5 tribes. Or 9.5, I guess, is actually the math there. These 9.5 tribes that don't have any inheritance yet, it really benefits them because it increases their military numbers, increases their fighting men. Okay, it gives them a strategic advantage that they might not otherwise have, and it's going to get them their land that they should possess. And in the same way, by doing what God has called us to do, there are going to be times where it doesn't benefit us as much as it benefits the people that we're doing it for or with. It's going to be a greater blessing to them than it will be for us. And through that whole process, we need to trust that God will provide for and protect us until that time is completed. Think about that. They're leaving their wives, their kids, their livestock in these cities unprotected. No fighting men will stay behind. They're all leaving. So that could leave their families and their possessions vulnerable. They're vulnerable to enemy attack. They're left open without any defenses. So who's going to take care of them? Who can handle the situation when they're gone? God can. And they have to trust that God will. If they don't, they're not crossing the Jordan. We need to trust that God will provide for and protect us until our time is completed, till that task is done, and we're able to go back to where we've established our inheritance, where God has really done great things for us. Until then, we need to trust that God is going to do it. And honestly, even in that time, we're pretty limited, aren't we? In our strength and our abilities, aren't we kind of limited? We can only do so much, and yet God is limitless. God's really the one that does all the protecting in the first place. We need to trust that God will do that God will do what he says he will do. So we remember what God has already done for us. We need to remember what God has instructed us to do, keep our calling in mind. And then 3, we need to remember the promise of God for what is to come. We need to remember what God has said is coming, what he's already promised us. You look at verse 15, and you see that God has already promised the other 9.5 tribes the land on the other side of the Jordan. Joshua says he's going to be giving it to them, which is fair, but we looked at it last week, and the way that God phrased it is, I'm going to take you over there, and everywhere you put your foot, that's ground I've already given you. So God looks at it as being completed already. He's like, it's done. I've given you that land. But it's hard for us to think that way because we haven't realized it yet in our time frame. Now, God is outside of time, our space-time existence. He can participate with us. He's intimate with us within that, but he actually finds his existence outside of that realm. So time doesn't affect him, but it affects us. So as God sees it, it's already done. As we see it, it's not done yet. because we haven't gotten there yet. We got to catch up to where God is. So it's important for us to remember what God has promised us already for what's to come. And that's what Joshua says. He reminds us, hey, you have to pass over until the Lord gives rest to your brothers as he has to you, and they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving to them. So they need to remember that there is a possession that needs to be taken. They need to remember that there are battles that need to be won first, but that God has already given them victory. What God has promised will come to pass. They don't need to worry about whether or not it's going to happen, because God has already said it will. And it's important for us as we move forward to remember the same things, because God has already provided you and I with certain promises as well. Promises of eternal life, promises of actual victory in accomplishing what God has called us to do. We're going to be here. We're going to have everything that we need to accomplish what God has called us to do if we rely on him and just keep moving forward. Sometimes it doesn't look that way. Sometimes in our own time frame, it doesn't look good. But in reality, what God has promised will come to be. We can know that for sure. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, we're actually reminded of that in the New Testament. As God is speaking, and he says through Paul, let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So if we will do what God has called us to do, if we'll keep moving forward in that, if we will take the steps God is asking us to take, then we will see the accomplishment of what he has promised us. We'll see it come to pass. We're going to receive it. We're going to see it in our own lives, actually be able to touch it, feel it, hear it. It's going to be tangible and real to us. Because our reward is sure so long as we endure. As long as we keep moving forward, as long as we take the steps God is calling us to take, we will always reap the harvest that he promised. Always. So we need to remember the promise of God for what is to come as we move forward in our lives with Jesus. We need to remember those things. So we need to remember what God has already done in the past. We need to remember what God has instructed us to do, our calling, our purpose. And we need to remember the promise of God for what is to come. But then we also need to remember to encourage others with what God has said to them. Now, through relationship with one another, with people in our lives, there are going to be times that those close to us will come and they will share with us the vision that God has provided for them. They will share with us the calling of God on their lives. They will speak to us, they will share it with us, and we will celebrate and encourage them. We can lift them up through the process. But there are going to be times in their lives when they start facing difficult circumstances that they may lose sight of what God has called them to do. That they may actually begin to doubt that that was God in the first place. These things happen, believe me. I've been there, I've experienced it myself on both ends of the equation. So it's important for us to remember to encourage others with what God has said to them. We see that in verses 16 through 19 as we see the men of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh remind Joshua of what God has said to him. It says, they answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us we will do. Wherever you send us we will go. Just as we have obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Already promised. So this is a great reminder for Joshua to keep moving forward in what God has called him to do, because God really did call him to do this. And God really has promised him that he'll be with him just as he was with Moses. And it's important for Joshua to remember that. So these men are reminding Joshua of that. whether or not they know it. Believe it or not, that's what's taking place. Whoever rebels against your command, this is verse 18, and disobeys your words, whatever you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So God's already said, Joshua, be strong and courageous. I'm with you. Everywhere you put your foot, I've already given you. Everywhere that you end up going, it's already yours. I'm giving you victory. Just be strong and courageous. And here these men are reminding Joshua of what God has said to him. And we all need that sometimes. God's promises to us have not changed. God's calling on our lives is irrevocable. That's in Romans 11:29, in case you need to look it up. It's there. Okay, it's one of my life verses. It's been super important to me as I've gone through my walk with Jesus to recognize that his gifts and his calling on my life are irrevocable. And that's something that I can just lose. It's important for us to remind others of those things when things are difficult and they begin to question it. Courage and strength for someone else can result from us reminding them of what God has said to them. They can gain courage, they can gain strength, they can gain what they need to take another step forward just by you and I reminding them of what God has already said. Don't you remember God saying this? You told me, remember we sat down and we were in this place and we were talking about these things and you brought all this up. Don't you remember when we were doing that and you told me about what God had said to you? If God said that, it hasn't changed. It's the same now as it ever was. Keep moving forward. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. I understand why you're upset or why this is difficult right now and why you might be doubting it. But if God said it, it's already done. Keep moving forward. That can provide courage and strength for them to move forward and to keep going when they don't have it within themselves. It's important for us to use our words to build others up, to give them strength and courage, to give them faith to move forward, to keep them in a place where they can take that next step, or at least not sit down and turn around and wonder what's next. Just keep them focused in where God needs them to be, doing what God needs them to do, what he's called them to do. Here are a few more verses that will actually speak to that. First is 1 Thessalonians 5:11. 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Paul, again writing this time to the church in Thessalonica. He says, therefore encourage one another and build one another up just as you are doing. So he's saying, I know you guys are doing this, but don't stop. Encourage one another. Build one another up. Ephesians 4:29. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. Okay, that's one thing that's already hard, especially for some of us. Some of us are good at being critical, good at calling to mind all of the problems that are taking place and all the things that are wrong. Okay? Paul, again, writing this time to the church in Ephesus, says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. He says, say encouraging things, build each other up, say positive things, help one another to stay in that positive space. That it may give grace. Remember, grace being is not mercy. Okay, we like to confuse the two. It happens a lot, especially in the modern U.S. church, confusing grace with mercy. But grace, remember, is the power to live. So what is one way that we can empower others around us to live and move forward in their life with Jesus? It's by letting the words that come out of our mouth be those things that are fit for building others up. Because when we do that, it helps to give grace to those who hear those things. It empowers them, it strengthens them, it encourages them so that they can take the next step. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 through 25. The writer of Hebrews says, let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. How do we encourage each other to be more loving, to do more good things in the world around them, to continue to move forward in what God has called them to do? Not neglecting to meet together. First, we have to be together. We have to build a relationship. We have to spend time with one another. Don't neglect that meeting together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. What is the day? The day of the Lord, when he returns, when he takes us out of here, when he comes, and the day of judgment, when he sits upon the throne and begins to finalize everything from this season and this time that we live in. All the more. So that means increasingly more, doing it more and more often. What do we need to do more and more often? Encourage one another. More and more often as we see the day of judgment approaching. I don't know about you, but it does look like to me the day of judgment is approaching. Seems like it's getting closer all the time. Now, it did to them also. Okay? Paul, in a number of his letters, makes it pretty clear that he expects to be there when the day of judgment happens, not ever having died. Okay? It's over 1,000 years ago that Paul was beheaded. Almost 2,000, so it's been a long time. But he expected the day of judgment to come in his lifetime, and I think for the most part, that followers of Jesus, disciples of Jesus, have expected it to come in their lifetime since Jesus left. But with each passing moment, we're getting closer. And as we see that day approaching, it's important for us to encourage one another, to build each other up. It's important for us to remember to encourage one another and build each other up with what God has already said, with the promises that God has made, with the calling of God upon our lives. So again, remember what God has already done for you. Remember what God has already done in the past. Remember what God has instructed us to do. We need to do that. Remember what God has called you to do in your life. Remember the promise of God for what is to come. Remember what God has promised you that's still out there in the future that you haven't seen yet, you haven't experienced yet. It's still coming because the promises of God are sure. Endure, keep going, keep moving forward. And remember to encourage others with what God has said to them. Remember to be that encouragement for someone else. Don't let those moments that you're given to encourage someone else slip by without taking advantage of them. You see, both Joshua and the men of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh were reminded of things in this passage. And there are things that can help us as well. By remembering these 4 things, putting them into practice, we can encourage others. We can find strength for ourselves in difficult times. And we can find encouragement to remain focused on what has called us to do. Whatever God has called us to do, we can refocus on that or maintain our focus on that simply by remembering these 4 things. And so today I want to pray that we can remember these 4 things this coming week. And that through that remembrance, as we remember those things, as we really work to remember those things throughout this week, that God's kingdom and those around us will benefit as we do. So let's pray. Father, thank you for today and the time that we've been able to spend together so far. And thank you for your word, Lord, the time we're able to spend studying it and seeing the example in the life of Joshua and your people Israel available to us. Lord, the reminders that we needed. Lord, these 4 things that we need to remember. Lord, I pray that you would keep them on our minds this week as we move forward, as we continue to live our lives with you, that we would remember what you've already done for us. Lord, that we would not allow ourselves to forget what you have done. That we would remember what you've instructed us to do. We would remember the calling upon our lives. we'd not lose sight of that calling, our purpose, Lord, that we would remember your promise of what's to come, Lord, that we would not forget what you have promised to do in our lives. But we would remind ourselves of those things as we move forward with you, that it would be strength and courage for us. And Lord, that we would remember to be encouraging to others around us, encouraging to our brothers and sisters, those who are following you with us. Lord, that we would be encouraging with the words that we speak to those around us, knowing that those words of encouragement can breathe life into a situation that needs life, that needs strength, that needs renewal, that needs to be just, Lord, needs a little something because the circumstances have grown really difficult and it's beginning to cause doubt. Help us to bring the words of life that change that situation and turn it towards you and provide the grace necessary to continue to move forward in the calling that you've placed on us. Lord, as we remember these things, as we put them into practice, as we act on these things, Lord, let that move your kingdom forward in this world. Let it move your kingdom forward in the lives of the people around us so that your kingdom benefits, and so do those around us, Lord. Lord, those who need encouragement, those who need strength, those who need grace. We thank you, Lord. We trust you for that. Lord, have your way in us. In Jesus' name, amen.